Hi, class. Welcome to another day, another evening if you're watching this at night. Hope you're doing good and hope your family's doing well. And your friends, I hope you're having fun being back home. And I think most of you, I know I have one student for sure that didn't get to go home, but I hope that most of you did. And I miss teaching you face to face. It's kind of weird. I feel it's just different teaching online like this, but we'll just have to go with it. So we're going to start today with a hymn. We're going to have the Mormon Tabernacle Choir sing to us. So enjoy this, if you would. Hear me. Oops. Oh, there we go. All right. Okay, why don't we just have a quiet moment, and I'll let you just, if you would, please just offer an opening prayer, and not just a personal prayer, that the Spirit will be with you and to teach you personally, and then we'll go from there. When I saw that handcart pulled through the icy river, it really felt very. It was a very powerful moment for me watching that, because I don't do very well in cold weather. I grew up in Arizona, and I don't think I would have made it if I had been in the Willie Handcart Company. I think I would have been dead. And so I look at them and I going across that cold water, and I just thought I would have just, like some men did, I would have just fell down on the bank and just cried when I got to that cold river. So I don't have a very good physiology, very good constitution in cold weather. I can handle hot weather. I can be in 120, I can work in construction. Did it from 5th grade till I was 28 years old in 120 degree weather. But yeah, put me in the cold weather, and I just think, oh man. So my heart goes out to him. Well, today we're going to talk about, why did the saints leave Nauvoo? What were the difficulties they faced crossing Iowa? Where did the Mormon Battalion march? Why is winter quarters significant? What challenges were at winter quarters, and what challenges did the Vanguard Company face? Now, in about fall 1845, the mobs, so remember Joseph was martyred in 1844, June 1844. So by fall 1845, the mobs have come around. They've surrounded Nauvoo. They start to torch the homes all around the perimeter of Nauvoo. And so in January 1846, Brigham Young, he will meet with the 12 and the Council of the 50 to try to decide. They wanted to plan the best and the quickest way to evacuate Nauvoo and establish, a new gathering place for the saints.
After Joseph's death, the majority of the people rallied to the leadership of Brigham Young.
Brethren, I do not say that it will never be right for this people to go from here, but I do say wait. Stay here, plow, sow and build that our infant city may grow and flourish.
But as the city grew, conflict also grew. In the fall of 1845, many houses and shops outside the city were destroyed.
Do nothing to retaliate. The surrounding counties must be convinced that we are not the aggressors.
What our situation is.
Troubles persisted. The city charter was repealed. Leaders of the church met with a governor's committee, and they were urged to leave the state before civil war erupted.
We agreed to leave in the spring, but hastened our work to complete the temple, praying that the Lord would defend us in this place until the temple was finished.
Yeah, so once the city charter was repealed, they could no longer defend themselves. So Brigham will, on February 15th, he pushed, well, I should say, first of all, before they leave, he realizes the time is come, but he'll endow 295 more saints on February 3rd. Now, I want to say that the Lord had already directed the saints to settle near the Great Salt Lake. And the lake was part of the Great Basin, a massive bowl-shaped region surrounded by mountains. He already knew about it. There was some good idea that they kind of knew the general area where they were to go, and they knew the prophet Joseph Smith had already had a vision that they were to go to the Rocky Mountains, and so they were already planning and preparing to go that way. In fact, if we go between the mountains to the place under consideration, said Brigham, there will be no jealousies from any nation. And so Brigham Young he says, let's count up all the saints. He met the councils. How many are ready to leave Nauvoo within a 6-hour notice? He said, all those men who are in danger, go, take their families. And so right about that time, on the same day that Brooklyn sailed for California, it was in New York, and it'll sail all the way around down below South America, down below the Cape, and all the way up. But 15 wagons will leave Nauvoo in an advance company. They'll cross the Mississippi River, go to the Iowa Territory, just west of Nauvoo, and then they'll camp in nearby Sugar Creek. I'll give you a close-up here so you can see where it is in relation, not too far from Nauvoo. Well, in that second chapter you read, one of the first things we learned is that the saints, they get at Sugar Creek, and the wind's blowing, it's cold, and hundreds of saints are shivering in damp coats and blankets. And meanwhile, Brigham Young has spent hours refining the plans to move the west. And while he was fasting and praying in the temple shortly before leaving Nauvoo, he had seen a vision of Joseph Smith pointing to a flag over a mountaintop. And Brigham knew the Lord had a place prepared for the church, but guiding thousands of saints, he knew there'd be a monumental task. But again, he had that vision, and Joseph said, build under the point where the colors fall, and you will have prosper and peace. And that place today is called Ensign Peak. And there is a flag up on it, and you can hike up to it. It's just not too far from downtown Salt Lake City. Well, luckily, as the months rolled on, the temperatures dropped below freezing, and the surface of the Mississippi turns to ice and allows easy passage. And soon, I mean, there's 2,000 people camped at Sugar Creek. And some will go back to Nauvoo time and time again on one errand or another. And the traffic back and forth, it bothers Brigham because he believed these saints were neglecting their families by going back, and they were focusing too much on their property back in Nauvoo City. So he decided, it's time to get out of Sugar Creek. Let's go. We need to go. We need to move across Iowa territories, even if the companies were under-equipped. So they take off and they start to go. I have an actual clip of them going across. Here we go. Oh.
Ringle, wrangle, dingy dong dangle. Ha! A mighty fine horse looking round a course. Gonna find me a pretty woman's love.
Oh, there she
Ringle,
is.
wrangle.
By the way, I should say a lot of romances came but as the saints crossed the plains, young man, take a young man, handsome young man, and beautiful young woman. They got a lot of things in common, and they're walking across together and attracted to each other, and they're with each other every day for thousands of plus miles. And I think proximity just helps you to get to know someone, and a lot of marriages came out of that just by mere proximity, by just being together. Anyway, so 500 wagons will start across the Iowa prairie. And you can see right here, so they're right here, they're at Sugar Creek, and they've got to get, let me back up. So they've got to get, if you look to the left there, they've got to get all the way across. They got to get all the way across Iowa. And they intended to cross it in 1 month, but that spring, as the saints were traveling through Iowa, they started to call themselves the Camp of Israel. And after the ancient Hebrews, the Lord had led, Israel out of captivity in Egypt. And day after day, they would battle the elements, snow, rain, snow turned to rain, and then the Iowa prairie, just once it started to thaw, became soft and muddy, and rivers and streams ran high and swift, and dirt roads just turned into a mire. And again, they thought they'd travel across it in a month, but they didn't do too well.
The call of Zion was in our ears, but the memory of Nauvoo was in our hearts.
Now this scene right here you're about to see was not planned, as I understand it, when they made this movie. I remember reading some information about it. That's supposed to be Eliza right there, the main character. And that man right there in the background running up, that's her dad. They went ahead and they thought, let's just go ahead and add this scene to the... We'll just go with it. I was also had read somewhere that when right there's that man laying on the ground, he'd broke his leg, and that wasn't part of the movie, supposed to be. So they thought, well, let's just go ahead and add it. So I don't know if that's urban legend, but that's what I was told back when this movie was being made. That's a great movie. All right, well, let's move on. So So that evening, one of the evenings, I don't remember what exact date, but as it was in your book, Saints, that you read, there was freezing rain, hail, coating in ice, tents laying flat, fallen trees crushed the wagon. And I remember reading that William was out all night rounding up the horses and the cattle that night, very discouraged because in the morning he needed sleep, but he was very worried about his wife, Diantha, who was pregnant, was back in Nauvoo, and he kept waiting to hear a word. Is she okay? She had her baby. And finally, word came that she did have her baby, and he was so excited and so relieved, and his burden just removed from his shoulders, that he sat down and he wrote this hymn, which we all know. And I thought I would just play just a couple of bars of it on my harmonica. And I can just imagine just sitting around the campfire and someone playing this either on guitar or harmonica or violin, and just kind of put yourself there. There's something about this hymn that is powerful. It's inspired, and it just really inspires us with hope. And I'll do my best to play it my harmonica. I don't ever play my harmonica, but here goes. Told you I'm not very good at the harmonica. In fact, that's about the only thing I can play. Well, I can play one more thing. I don't think they played that around the campfire, though. But all right, here we go. Boom. Okay, so next slide. Nauvoo Temple's dedicated. So even though the Brigham Young left with quite a few wagons, there were still people back in Nauvoo trying to finish the temple because they felt it was important that, as Joseph directed, that they finish that temple and that they dedicate it. And after that, so that's in May, and then June, the saints will arrive in Mosquito Creek. And that's about the time that Brigham Young learns that President Polk of the United States wants 500 soldiers from the church to go and to fight in the Mexican War. And, well, we can't talk about this because I'm not with you, but let's go on to the second chapter that you read, Word and Will of the Lord. 3 days before the battalion marched, Brigham counseled them. He said, now whatever you do, keep your bodies clean, be chaste, wear your temple garments, behave honorably towards the Mexican people, treat prisoners with civility, never take life if it can be avoided. And he said, I promise you that the men that do this, they will not have any fighting. And I wanted to show you here, back up a little bit. You can see the red trail there, that's the trail that the Mormon battalion took. And you can see them. They go right down there in southern Arizona, not far from where I grew up there in Phoenix. But they went right through the Sonoran Desert. And as I saw that, my first thought was, because of the time of year they went, oh my gosh, there's so many rattlesnakes down there and scorpions. And I thought, wow, I wonder how many. Be interesting to go read their journals and just read about how many rattlesnakes they encountered because I'd go hunting in the desert and see them, but back then, they would be crossing places where no one's ever crossed before. So as they were crossing, as the saints, so back to the saints as they're crossing Iowa, the people who lived near the trail sometimes would tease the pioneers, and a 16-year-old girl named Sarah Jane Staker, she went into a tin shop to have her measuring cup fixed, and the tinner said, haven't you faith to heal your cup? Giving her a hard time, and she said, I love what she said, no, sir, but if you'll put the handle on good, I'll have faith that it'll stay on. And bystanders, they laughed and clapped as thought that was a very clever answer. And the tinner was so amused that he did the job for free. Well, one of the things that Brigham was inspired to do was to create midway stations across Iowa where the Saints could wait out the bad weather, build cabins, and plant crops for those who would come later. And this is a picture of Mount Pisgah, Iowa. And Brooklyn, right about August 1846, the Brooklyn will finally arrive in California. Sam Brannan is at the head, as you read. And as he looks out, as he peers through the haze of that day, I guess it was a very hazy day, he sees this rugged shoreline, and just inside the San Francisco Bay, he sees a crumbling Mexican fort, and flapping in the breeze above, he sees the American flag. And he feared something like this would happen. And he was so discouraged, so were the rest of the Saints, because it was a sure sign the United States had seized San Francisco from Mexico. And at that time, they were discouraged because, the United States hadn't helped them, and they were fleeing to go to worship as they wish. And so to see that now they have to deal with the U.S. again, eventually they'll come on good terms. But they'll finally arrive at winter quarters, and that was a dark time for the Saints. That was difficult. And as you can see here, we'll just go, boop, there we go. And they'll camp in winter quarters. And just a little note about winter quarters, that there were 9,000 Saints in the area at one point, 3,500 in winter quarters. They were all up and down the Missouri River, but 1 out of 10 died of disease or accident, and half of those were children. And there were tons of flies, mosquitoes, the Saints, but they just with faith, they just trudged on. They planted, plowed, built mills, stores, shops, and they laid out the whole settlement in city blocks. And as you read, it was interesting, Wilford Woodruff, as he was cutting timber, a tree struck and broke some of his ribs. And then his little son Joseph caught a severe cold, and they had to bury his body in the settlement's newly plotted cemetery. It was up on the brow of the hill. And some weeks after Joseph's death, Phoebe delivered a baby prematurely, and then the child will die 2 days later. And just a little incidental note about Wilford Woodruff. That man had a lot of challenges in his life. If you feel like I've had a lot of challenges, you're in good company if you've had a lot of trials. Listen to all the things that happened to him, according to Encyclopedia of Mormonism. And I've read this elsewhere. He broke his arms, he broke his legs, he split his foot with an axe, he was bit by a rabid dog, crushed and pinned by trees, had blood poisoning when he accidentally cut his arm while skinning an ox that had died of poison, survived the wreck of a speeding train. I'm like, are you serious? Really? He nearly drowned, nearly frozen to death, and he was scalded by hot water, and he suffered several severe illnesses. So yeah, this is a man that struggled. Someone once asked him, why did all these bad things happen to you? And he said, and someone had asked him that, and the only answer he could ever get was, the devil knew you'd right if you lived. And he said, and I guess he did. So yeah, really interesting, huh? Well, later in October 1846, the mobs will come into the city of Nauvoo and attack the remaining Saints. This is called the Battle of Nauvoo. So amid all the suffering in winter quarters, Brigham Young gets word that these 1,200 mobsters had attacked this small community of Saints left in Nauvoo, and there were only about 160 that fought back. And they were defeated after a few days. They finally made peace, and the battle ended on the 16th of September, and then they were driven across the Mississippi River into Iowa, and the mob harassed them. They ransacked their homes, their wagons, and they will seize the temple. They'll desecrate inside of it. They'll mock the Saints as they fled to camps, as the Saints fled to the camps on the other side of the river. And when Brigham Young hears about it, he said, the poor brethren and sisters, widows and orphans, sick and destitute, are now lying on the west bank of the Mississippi. Now is the time for labor. Let the fire of the covenant which you made in the house of the Lord burn in your hearts like a flame unquenchable. So people will go back and help them and reach out to them. There's about 640 saints. They were called, they called them the poor camp. They were stretched along the Iowa side of the river, and they couldn't move and go anywhere because they were poor. They didn't have any wagons, no teams. They were suffering from hunger, inadequate shelter for several weeks. And then on Friday morning, on the 9th of October, thousands of exhausted quail who'd flown some distance started dropping in the camps of the starving saints. And one of the best things I could find a background on it was from the journal of Thomas Bullock. Thomas Bullock was a church historian, I believe, at the time. And he said, every man, woman, and child had quail to eat for dinner. And he said they would fly, and I'm reading from his journal, he said they would fly around the camp 3 times, descend it again, run the gauntlet past each wagon. The sick knocked them down with sticks, and the little children would catch them alive in their hands, and some were cooked for breakfast. And he said one descends upon her tea board. I don't know what a tea board is, but I'm assuming it's where they're, I don't know what it is. In the midst of our cups. It's a thing that holds cups, whatever that is. And while we were actually around the table eating our breakfast, which a little boy 8 years old catches alive with his hands. He said they kept flying around the camp. They kept coming back, sometimes under the wagon, sometimes over the wagon, even in the wagons where the poor and sick saints were lying in bed. And thus he said they felt like this was a direct manifestation from the Most High. He said even when they left, the quail followed them for a while. Isn't that interesting? I believe Heavenly Father was looking out for his covenant people just like he did the Israelites when they left Egypt, to go to Israel, to Palestine, to the Holy Land. Well, let's talk about that last chapter that you read. So the Vanguard Company leaves for Utah in spring of 1847. And about the time Sam Brannan, when they leave for Utah, Sam Brannan will leave San Francisco Bay to go east to Utah to find Brigham Young. And Brigham Young will reprimand the brethren because many of them ignored his counsel. One of the things he told them, be careful about, what you hunt. In fact, he said, don't kill the buffalo. And he said, don't idle away your free time with gambling and wrestling and dancing late into the night. And sometimes he'd wake at night and he'd hear the men fighting over something that happened. And he worried that their quarrels are going to turn into fistfights or worse, cholera, because that's what happened to Zion's camp when it marched from Kirtland to Missouri. The brethren there was so much contention among them that Joseph Smith said, a scourge will come if you don't repent. And I think Brigham's, who was in that Zion's camp, is saying, hey, this could happen again, brethren. So finally he stands up in the morning and he gives a sermon and he says, do you suppose that we're going to look out a home for the saints, a resting place, a place of peace where they can build up the kingdom and bid the nations welcome with a low, mean, dirty, trifling, covetous, wicked spirit? He said, no, brethren. And he called them to repentance. And afterward, the men, they grouped themselves together in priesthood quorums, and they covenanted by uplifted hand to do the right and to walk humbly before God. And the next Sabbath day, when they took the sacrament, there was a new spirit with them all. And in fact, Heber C. Kimball wrote in his journal, he said, I have never seen the brethren so still and sober on a Sunday. Well, that's because that's what a good reprimand from Brigham Young will do. So by mid-May, you can see where the Vanguard Company is. So most of the saints are still, if you look to the right of the arrow, most of the saints are still back on the Missouri River in winter quarters, but the Vanguard Company of, I think, 143 people are about, right there between Ash Hollow and Confluence Point. They'd covered, several hundred miles. And they saw lots of buffalo. And the men were eager to hunt the buffalo, but Brigham said, "Don't do it, brethren. Don't waste the meat." So as you read, William Clayton, he would estimate the company's mileage, and not far into the journey, Orson Pratt worked with Appleton Harmon. He was a skilled craftsman. He said, "Hey, let's make a rotometer." I don't know if he's the one that coined the word. It's a rotometer. And we're going to make a rotometer. I like that word. And there you can tell, huh? I keep saying it. There were problems with the first rotometer, though. So they used it, and it wasn't, completely accurate, but it gave them a fairly good estimate. But when they get to Salt Lake City, there's a guy named William King who will make a better one. And then him and William King and Brigham Young will go back to winter quarters in August of that. They arrive in July of 1847, and William and Brigham and others will go back to winter quarters in August. And what's an interesting little story is after William King builds that rotometer and he returns the Brigham Young to winter quarters, he disappears. Yeah, there's no record of his return to Utah, no indication of a marriage or children in the census back east, no further appearance in Mormon history. The guy's just gone. Mystery man. Makes the rotometer, and then he disappears. Yeah, and then they'll run into Jim Bridger, and he'll tell them about the Bear River Valley. If any of you from Utah have been to Bear Lake, that's Bear River Valley. And he'll say both Bear River and Salt Lake Valley have good soil, freshwater streams, and year-round rain. In fact, Wilford Woodruff do a little fly fishing when he gets there. And he says, "I'm the first man here to ever fly fish in this territory." And he caught fish. He outfished everybody. He was using worms. He said, "I proved the superiority of fly fishing." Well, one of the things Jim Bridger warned, he said, if you go down to Utah County, down there by Utah Lake, he said, just be careful. There's the Ute Indians. And he said, don't disturb them. Yeah, and by the way, that was a picture of Ute Indians down south, yeah. And June 30th is when Samuel Brannan will finally arrive from San Francisco. According to Thomas Bullock's journal, he arrived on June 30th. And right about here, you can see right by Lombard Ferry is where he'll arrive and meet up with Brigham Young's Vanguard Company. And he's very enthusiastic for the climate and the soil in California, of course, because California is beautiful. And he'll urge the company to claim San Francisco Bay. He says, before the other settlers arrive, he says, let's go there. It's awesome. It's a great place. It's got the ocean, got the beach. He said the land was ideal for settlement. And he said there's important men in California that are friendly to the saints. And they'll welcome us. And Brigham listened to Sam, and even Sam said, yeah. And there's Disneyland. Okay, no, he didn't say that. But Brigham listened to him, and the allure of California coast is certainly beyond question. But he knew the Lord wanted the saints to establish the new gathering place closer to the Rocky Mountains. That he'd already had a vision, and he said, "Our destination is the Great Basin." So he won't listen to Sam Brennan. Sam Brennan will go back, and the California Gold Rush will come, and he'll become if I recall, from a little bit of history I know about him, he'll become wealthy and a prestigious man in the community. Well, by July 12th, so they're going to arrive in Salt Lake Valley July 24th, at least Brigham will. And July 12th, he'll get a fever. His wife, Clara, gets it first, then he gets it. And he'll tell Orson Pratt, just press on. Take men with you. So Orson will take 42 men. And about a week later, Brigham will tell Willard Richards and George A. Smith, Erastus Snow, and others, he says, just go on, catch up with the advance company. And he said, but whatever you do, halt at the first suitable spot after reaching the Salt Lake Valley and put in our seed potatoes, buckwheat, and turnips, regardless of the final location. Just as soon as you get there, just plant. Well, the next morning, July 24th, that's a special day. That's a pioneer day for us. Wilford Woodruff is driving. He drove his carriage for several miles down a deep ravine. And Brigham lay behind him in a carriage, too feverish and weak to walk. And soon they traveled along a creek through another canyon until they arrived at a level bench of land that opened to a view of the Salt Lake Valley. And I can't wait to see that on video when I get up to the spirit world. And Brigham, he couldn't quite see the valley clearly, so Wilford turned the carriage to give Brigham a better view, and looking out across the valley, Brigham studied it for several minutes, and then he said, "It is enough, and this is the right place. Drive on."
When spring came that April of 1847, the Quorum of the 12, under the direction of Brigham Young, handpicked a vanguard company and left winter quarters with 143 men, 3 women, and 2 young boys, 72 wagons, 93 horses, 66 oxen, 52 mules, 19 cows, 17 dogs, and some chickens. Between that refuge and the promise of Zion stood a vast plain and the fertile Platte River, their lifeline as they pushed farther into the American West. Moving across Nebraska, they marked the rolling miles and journeyed past Chimney Rock, a solitary formation jutting out of the prairie. Into this land speckled with sage and air swirling with dust, tired oxen lumbered, wagon wheels creaked, brave men and women toiled, and occasionally wolves howled. Even today, signs of their crossing are carved into the landscape. The pioneers left the North Platte and now followed the Sweetwater, a stream they would ford many times. Camping at the round outcropping called Independence Rock, a few of these 19th century travelers left their names on the granite stone. Past Independence Rock, the wagons skirted the side of Devil's Gate, a deep gash in the hillside and often mentioned in their journals. The trail soon turned upward and increasingly rocky. Here at Rocky Ridge is holy ground. This very spot is one of the highest points on the trail west. The pioneers who came over this ridge faced discouragement, some even death, as they inched their way up the sharp slope. I hold in my hand a square nail and a piece of metal jolted loose from a wagon or a handcart. Imagine facing this ridge in a wagon. Then imagine pulling a handcart. For some, the punishing climb of Rocky Ridge would be fatal. The Martin and Willie Handcart companies of 1856 were caught in early blizzards near the summit. Rescue came from Salt Lake, but too late to save close to 200 souls who perished in the cold and deep snow. Martin's Cove sheltered many during that agonizing and poignant time. A memorial at Rock Creek honors those buried here for their faith in the face of enormous adversity. In the heroic effort of the handcart pioneers, we learn a great truth. All must pass through a refiner's fire, and the insignificant and unimportant in our lives can melt away like dross and make our faith bright, intact, and strong. There seems to be a full measure of anguish, sorrow, and often heartbreak for everyone, including those who earnestly seek to do right and be faithful. Yet this is part of the purging to become acquainted with God.
All right. You know, once the Saints arrived in Salt Lake Valley, their problems weren't over because As Isabella Horn wrote after that first winter, says the next spring after she was there, she said, the snakes come crawling out. She says, terrifying the children. She says, but that wasn't the worst of it. Mice came out of the ground by thousands. They got into our trunks and boxes, eating our clothing, falling down on us from the roof of our little dugouts and running over us by night and running up the sleeves and the backs. And a variety of traps were soon made, she said. A piece of thin board about 1.5 feet long and 6 inches wide was whittled off around at each end, leaving the middle 4 inches long. And then a little grease, she said, was put on the edges of the wide part, which was then laid over a pail of water. And then when the mice would, I guess they wanted that grease, so whenever they ran out to get the grease on the board, they turned and tipped into the water. And she said dozens would be killed in one evening. And I found something on the internet to show a little thing you could buy and put over a bucket. I think I'd rather just use a mousetrap, but kind of gross, little mice floating around. She went on to say, Sister Haight brought her cat with her. She says, and I gave 50 cents for one of her kittens when it was 3 weeks old, and she proved very useful. From her I supplied several of my neighbors with cats, which with the traps soon began to diminish their troublesome little pests. Yeah. I'd learned that during one of the Black Plagues in Europe, so many people died, but they weren't dying in the Jewish ghettos, and they wondered why. And they thought maybe they were cursing the Christians, but because they were so anti-Semitic. But what scholars now believe is that the Christians were superstitious of cats, and the Jews were not, and so they had lots of cats, and so the cats killed the mice and the rats and kept the plague from them. So just a little interesting thought. It's something I learned in my Christian history class a couple weeks ago. She also said, then we had an awful time with the bed bugs. The timber of which our houses were built was full of them. And it was years before they were entirely subdued. In fact, it reminds me, I built a log bed for my wife when we were first married. Our whole entire king-size bed was a ginormous, just all logs, big logs that I had got at a logging place, and they had the bark on them and everything. I like at that time I liked the rugged look, and one night I was laying there in bed and I heard a little like a kind of a scratching. I'm like, what the heck is that? And get up in the morning, I'd see a little pile of dust, on one of the logs, and then I kept hearing that noise. I'm like, what is that? And I finally realized there were bugs in my log, not bed bugs, but they were timber beetles. They were just tiny. You couldn't even see them. They were inside the wood. Anyway, I had to spray that whole log bed in our room. Okay, that story doesn't have a point, but yeah. So bugs in the wood are bad. But the saints stayed there, and as you know, they turned the wilderness. They made it blossom as a rose, made it beautiful, made it a great place for all people to live. And Utah is a beautiful place. I know why Heavenly Father led them there. And when my grandma drove me to Provo to go to the MTC, as soon as I got into, before I even got into Provo, we took a wrong turn and ended up in Moroni, and we ended up going through these beautiful mountains, the Rocky Mountains. And I told my grandma, I said, this place is beautiful. And then when we got to Provo and I saw all the beautiful mountains with the Y on it, and I told her, I said, when I get off my mission, I'm going to school there. Here, this place is beautiful. And I did. That's where I went to school. And so, yeah, it's a beautiful place. And I could see why. I heard a Hollywood star once say that Utah is it's the world's greatest little secret. And it truly is. Its prices of home are just skyrocketing right now because everybody wants to live there, and it's just gorgeous. The weather's moderate, but yeah, but it just, to me, is a testimony that the Lord, that He took them to a good place, a place where they could be alone for a while, where they could prosper and proliferate and become a great people. so that they could help and influence the rest of the world, people in all faiths, all religions, and all missionaries going out and members of the church and blessing so many people. I think I'll close with this. So, we often applaud our pioneer ancestors, said Elder Maxwell, for their spiritual achievements, and because he says, they've done great things. But then he said this, and this is one of my favorite quotes by Elder Neal A. Maxwell. He says, "The special spirits who have been reserved to live in these times of challenges and who overcome will one day be praised for their stamina by those who pulled handcarts." I bear testimony to you that we look back at their challenges and their trials and we say, man, I just don't know if I could do that. And I was telling you at the beginning, I think I would have died crossing. But they look to us and say, I can't believe what you're going through. I can't believe what you have to overcome and conquer spiritually. For us, it was physical. For you, it was emotional for them too. There was challenges that were spiritual, challenged them spiritually. Physical challenges spiritually and emotionally. But I see them looking to us and going, but your spiritual challenges are so big and so great. We praise you. In fact, maybe we're in the spirit world, we'll go we'll say when did you live? When did you grow up on the earth? And be like, yeah, it was 2020 when I was in college. And they'll be like, we're not worthy. Okay, maybe they won't think that, but they will say, you're amazing and good job. Keep going forward. So brothers and sisters, I have a testimony that in Jesus Christ, through Christ, by him, we can do hard things. I can do all things in Christ, which strengtheneth me. That is my favorite scripture in the New Testament, and that is my theme scripture. And that is what these saints teach me. And I hope that's what they